Stacy. So I'm Alan Whitehouse. Let me go through some slides here. We're going to talk about best practices for planning, budgeting, and forecasting here. So, and just one thing, let me just make sure. Okay, there we go. So let's kind of talk about a quick agenda. We're going to do a quick, super quick overview about who I am and what the company I'm with is all about. I'm not going to worry about the survey right now. We are going to do the presentation talking about best practices, and at the end we will open it up for questions. So right now, if you want to hold all your stuff until the end, that'll be great. We'll get through it, then we can open up any kind of questions that you have towards the end. So who is TrueSky? Well, TrueSky, we are the creators of what is called a corporate performance management software. And really what that does is that is an application that helps you with budgeting, planning, and forecasting, reporting, analytics, and dashboarding. Express Business Systems is one of our partners that helps deploy our application. Just so you know, again, we're working very, very closely with them about having a budgeting and forecasting and planning application. Now, just so you all know, this presentation is nothing to do with our application at all. These are all general best practices, tips and tricks that you can use in your day-to-day, even if you're using something like Excel, which probably most of you are, to manage your budgeting and forecasting process. So again, it has nothing to do with the application. Now, who am I? My name is Alan Whitehouse. I have been in this industry for, I guess, longer than I care to admit nowadays, working with budgeting and forecasting applications, accounting systems, as well as customer relationship management applications. I have worked with clients in multiple industries. If there is an industry out there, I've probably dabbled in it with a client at least once or twice in my career. And I work with clients in multiple sizes. So I have clients that have run the gamut from maybe $1 million a year in revenue up to, I think my largest is somewhere upwards about 20 billion. So I've got a wide range of experience here. And this is what's really drawn upon, is this 27 years of experience and working with different clients and different sizes of clients to kind of come up with this series of best practices for when you're doing budgeting and forecasting. So let's set the stage here a little bit before we get too far into it, so we're always on the same page. So it's kind of doing this. So if I use the word budget, that is synonymous with using the word plan, synonymous with using the word forecast. Some people, think of these different, length of time. Forecast might be sales, budget might be expenses, whatever. But for this presentation, these terms are pretty much all interchangeable. If I use the word template, that's a data input form. And if you're using Excel, that would be an Excel worksheet. A contributor, if I use that term, that is somebody that is doing data input. A reviewer would be somebody that's doing the approvals of that data, kind of a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Now, because I know where most of you are coming from, Excel is kind of going to be the focus of this presentation. But again, a lot of these tips and tricks will apply even if you're using an application that are out there. And the most important thing that you need to remember about this presentation is that your presenter, myself, is insanely smart, handsome, and witty. So when we get started in this presentation, I like to kind of lay some foundation groundwork about why do we budget. And this is a question that before you go into a budget cycle, even if it's a once a year budget cycle or every quarter or every month if you're doing like rolling forecasts, this is a good question for you to ask yourself. Why do we budget? And ultimately there's a couple different reasons. First one I like to say is because we have to. And I know that sounds kind of flippant, but in reality it's a valid reason for why you have to budget. Maybe you have a covenant put on you by a bank to keep a line of credit open, so you have to give them a future-looking forecast. Maybe you have a regulatory body saying you need to give us a forecast. Maybe you have a board of directors that wants that budget, right? So in many aspects, because we have to is a valid reason for doing budgeting. You budget for some financial predictability, right? So maybe you're trying to get to cash flow. You're trying to see where we need to be at the end of the day so we can plan to grow the business. You budget to understand the business drivers. Maybe you're a manufacturer and you have to buy commodity items to create your product, right? You need to know how many units you're going to need and how far in advance you need to plan for that. So you're budgeting to understand those drivers. And in a lot of ways, you budget to manage performance. Now, these 4 reasons are, kind of my encapsulation of why people do budgeting. When you're doing a budget, you might be budgeting for one of these reasons, two of these reasons, three, or all four of these reasons. Everyone is a bit different here. And over the course of time, why you're doing budgeting may change. Today it may be because you have to, but next year it might be because you're trying to get better at financial predictability for the organization. The reason I bring this up is I think it's important because your changes evolve, because your business evolves over the course of time. I think it's important every time you go into a budget cycle, you need to ask yourself this question about why are you doing a budget? Because the kind of data you capture, the kind of people you get involved in the process are going to vary depending on why you are doing that budget. And again, you have to adjust as your business changes over the course of time. So before you start a budget cycle, just take a few minutes and think about this. Why are we doing this budget? What are we hoping to accomplish? And that will drive everything else that you need to think about. So let's talk about, again, to get on the same page, some of the elements of a budget. Well, really, I think there are three big, buckets that you can think about that come into creating a budget or a forecast or a plan. There is the people budget, there is the data bucket, and there is the process bucket or element, whatever term you want. And each of these has some subcomponents to it. So when we're talking about the people, three of the things that I want you to keep in mind are these three terms: involvement, accountability, and time. Involvement. How involved are your people that are working on the budget in the budget process? And when I think about an involvement, there's actually a couple different components of this. There is physical involvement. How much time are they spending on the budget? But what I think is more important is mental involvement. How much thought are they actually giving to the budget that you're working on? And then even more important than that, what is their emotional involvement on this budget? How important is this budget to this individual user, right? The level of involvement that you get will determine how good your final numbers are at the end of the day. Accountability. You would really be surprised how many organizations I have dealt with over the course of time that the people that put in the budget, there is no negative consequence for being off on your budget or forecast. Now, I'm not talking about little numbers here. I work with a lot of organizations where people could be off by 1,000%, 10,000%, get nothing right or even close, and there is no downside to that, right? So as an organization, if your people aren't being held accountable to your budgets and forecasts, and there is not a downside to getting the numbers wrong or just putting any kind of numbers, how good do you think the quality of the numbers are that you are going to have? So you need to put policies and procedures in place to hold your people accountable to the budget, okay? Then we talk about time. How much time are you giving your people to work on the budget? Don't forget that we've got a huge amount of things going on in our lives right now, right? A lot of us are, ignore the storm that's hitting Texas right now. But even before that, right, people are working from home. You've got kids screaming in the background. Schedules and everything else are all messed up, right? So now you're asking people to do a budget, but they've got everything else to do on a day-to-day basis, and they have to find time to do the budget, right? So just because you're asking them to do a budget doesn't mean that any of their other work duties change. So when you're doing a budget, you need to find ways to give your people time to actually focus on the budget. And how do you do that? Well, you probably got to take away some of their other duties during the budget cycle and offload that work to other people. If not, what happens, right? People, they get stressed, they are dropping balls, they're doing too many things at once, and inevitably it's the budget that is going to come out half done, not as good as you would like it when push comes to shove. Let's talk a little bit about the data process, the data elements, right? That's really consists of these four components: drivers, detail, external information, and timeliness. When I talk about drivers, and I'm going to show you some examples about this, why this is important later on. Are you just budgeting dollars, or are you getting down to the units and the quantities and the head counts and everything else of the budget? And as we go, I'm going to show you examples of why that is important and why not budgeting and just budgeting dollars is leading you to some subpar budgets. Detail. First thing, what level of detail are you budgeting? Well, the first thing that comes to your mind when I ask you, would you like to budget more details? Everyone's going to jump to saying, yes, we want to get more and more and more detail. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think that should be different later on as to why I want you to actually budget less detail than what you're doing today if you want really high quality budgets. External information. Are your people actually spending the time to take into account external information and what's going on in the world around you? We now live in a world today where, you did a budget or a forecast certainly 50 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago. You didn't really have to worry about competition outside of your local area. But today, with the internet and the world as it is becoming, a smaller and smaller place metaphorically, you're experiencing competition from areas that you never did before. So if your people are only focusing about what's going on in your neighborhood and not thinking about what's going on across the world with your suppliers or your other competitors, you're not really getting high quality budget numbers. And then we talk about timeliness. Timeliness refers to how quick can you turn a budget around. I think the last year has shown everyone that the concept of doing a once a year budget is no longer viable to running a business because things are changing in the marketplace, regardless of what your marketplace is, far too fast. And if it's taking you 3 months to run a budget cycle, you're never going to have timely information in which to drive your business forward. And again, I'm going to hopefully walk you through some of these things as we go forward about timeliness. Then we're going to talk a little bit about process. Accessibility. I'm sure many of you learned a hard lesson over the last year about how accessible are your systems to all of your different employees. How quick can people get it, the information they need at the applications they need if they have to work from home? I mean, it used to be if they had to work from remote or a hotel, but now can they get at it when they work from home? So you need to ensure that if you want high quality budgets going forward, all of your systems need to be accessible, okay? How secure is your data? And whenever I talk security, the first thing that you jump to mind about is our data secure enough? I actually want you to think a little bit differently about that, that you need to make sure that it's a balancing act, that you don't want your data so secure that people are being kept the information they need to make high quality decisions. As a budget manager, how visible is the process to everyone? Can you see who's done, who isn't done, who's failing, who's running behind? How confident are you in those numbers based on your policies and procedures? And these are all things I hope to help you through. And then the last two, duration and frequency. How long does it take you to run a budget cycle? Again, if you're running a 3-month budget cycle once a year, you're going to fall behind as a business. You need to be moving towards things like doing quarterly reforecast at a minimum and getting the budgeting cycle down to being able to do it within a matter of weeks. And again, we're going to help you with that. But in all these different areas, if you have breakdowns, that's going to ultimately affect the accuracy of your budget. Before I get into some more concrete tips and tricks, let's talk about the typical versus the ideal budget cycle. Typical budget cycle probably goes on right now today, or used to, about 120 days, right? And you spent your time kind of like how these chevrons at the top level are set, where you spend a lot of time creating the different input sheets you need. You create a lot of time trying to get people to input numbers and going back and forth. You spend a little bit of time reviewing quickly the numbers. Then you spend a whole lot of painful time doing that merge of all of your numbers to get it back together. And then by the time you get ready to present it to your board of directors, the bank, whoever, you're down to the final couple of days. It's rushed and mistakes happen. Well, at the end of the day, I want to help you get to something like you see down below, where you've got templates that are more and more reusable from budget cycle to budget cycle. So you don't have to spend time recreating the wheel each and every time. That you've got policies and procedures in place that get your people to input the data in a rapid amount of time. That merge can, be taken away or decreased dramatically, so you don't have to spend all the time. But then what you gain is a lot of time to do analysis and strategy on your numbers before you have to present it to your board or your bank or whoever the case may be. So Let's talk about this first chevron, the creation, because ultimately the better you are at capturing data, the better your end results are going to be. So the first thing I want you to think about, and if you do not take away anything else from this presentation, other than this, I want you to think about this component, which is what I call the golden rule of budgeting and forecasting. Nobody likes budgeting. Now, that is a little bit extreme. There are some individuals that do like doing budgeting and forecasting. They are the extreme minority out there. For the most part, nobody likes doing budgeting and forecasting. And that's, understandable, right? It's taking time out of their day-to-day. They're having to think differently. They're having to do something different than what they're normally used to doing. They're being held accountable, hopefully, to these numbers, right? There's a lot of stress that goes along with it. I got to think differently, all this kind of stuff. So keep this in mind when you're planning your budget process, when you're planning your cycles, who you're getting involved, what your layouts are going to be. Everything you do needs to be built around this concept that no one likes doing this. And if you keep that in mind and you accept it and you embrace it and you work with it rather than fight it, the process is going to go smoother. You're going to get better data and so forth. Next, spend a little bit of time giving your people guidance, okay? And by guidance, I mean, what are the rules for doing budgeting and forecasting? Now, a lot of times you may just send out an email really quick. And the problem is we all get way too many emails every day, and it becomes clutter, it becomes noise, it finds difficult to do it. My biggest suggestion for you when you're doing it, in Excel, put all your rules, your budget cycle, your dates, your increases, your decreases, your targets, whatever, in the first worksheet of Excel when you're doing budgeting and forecasting, right? This way, when anybody goes to do budgeting and forecasting, all that information is right at their fingertips, it's in their face. They're constantly reminded about it, and they don't have to go hunt and peck. You're going to find that this little thing, it's not going to prevent every question you're going to get, it's not going to prevent everything, but this might cut down on about 60% of all the common questions that you get every time you go into a budget cycle. All right, next up, keep it simple. Okay, this is something I'm really going to stress. Now, what you're seeing on screen right now is an actual budget input sheet I got from a company that I worked with a few years ago. Okay, at first blush, this does not seem like too bad of an input sheet. We've got some account groupings going down the left side. They're doing it quarterlies and they're going out multiple years, going across the top. Okay, however, in order to complete their budget cycle, you actually have to zoom out to 12% in Excel to see what their form looked like for doing input, okay? I guarantee you that these users wasted a huge amount of time going back and forth, left and right, up and down, trying to remember what numbers they put in one section to get to numbers out in another section, okay? This added huge amounts of time and complexity and confusion and headaches and swearing, I'm sure, to the budgeting and forecasting process. So when you're designing your sheets, keep it simple. So up here is an example of some things that I would recommend. And again, pick and choose what works for you. First of all, this upper section that you can see here in the blue very clearly states, what is this template all about? This is for office expenses. What department and what location am I working on, and what currency am I in, and what budget version am I working on? It's right there. They can see it in their face. I have very specific coloring and shading. Yellow shade cells are for data input. The blue-gray are things that they should not be editing, that are, they're priors like actuals and so forth, right? Very clear what accounts they're working for. We've used some of the Excel data visualizations to let them know whether or not they're hitting their targets. That's where the little green and the red is, so they're getting instant feedback right there. And we've tried to keep all of this one screen wide. So some of that is using the little Excel groupings you can see up at the very top. But the reason why I like to keep it one screen wide, every one today has that little roller track thing, the roller, I don't know what's called, the wheel on your mouse. And it's very easy for you to scroll up and down. But when you're going left and right, you actually have to get out of what you're doing. So again, this makes your people more efficient. It's right there in their face. They know exactly what they need. Okay. Next, spend a little time tailoring the templates to the user group that you're working with. Not everyone is an accountant. in your organization. Not everyone is a department manager. Some are salespeople. They have different roles. Tailor the templates to the people that are who's entering them in and what is the business process. So up here, this is the kind of thing that a lot of you probably roll out to get your people to budget travel expenses, right? It's very much accounting based. It's very much GL based. You've got airfare, hotels and lodging, all that down the side, right? Well, if I'm a sales rep who travels the country, you know, doing sales calls, right? That's not how I think about my expense budget for travel. I'm probably thinking more trip based, right? So where I get them put in the trips and then put in the dollars that related to it, because that's how I think. I'm going to go see customer A, customer B, customer C, whatever the case may be. So if you're doing smart setup in Excel with smart linkages and so forth, you should be able to have these different formats, and they're going to help at the end of the day improve the quality of the stuff that your people are putting in. Make it easy for them, get rid of all those extra spreadsheets that they're creating on their own desktop. All right. Next, connect to your data. Don't do copy paste. Okay. This concept is probably one of the more complicated to do. Connecting your back-end ERP to, say, Excel or your CRM system or your order entry system to Excel. And it might be the kind of thing that you don't have the skill sets on staff to do. It might be the kind of thing that you have to, you know, work with a company like Express to help you with, okay? Because you may need some specific, you may need to know the tables, the database, and some more technical knowledge, right? So this is the kind of thing that odds are you're going to have to invest in. You're going to have to spend some money on. But connecting to your data is also the one thing you can do that probably has the highest positive return on investment of any tip or trick that I can give you today. By connecting to your data, you can, with one button, refresh all of your actuals, refresh your accounts, refresh your departments, and so forth, without having to do all of that data dump out of your accounting system and having to manually manipulate it in Excel and do copy paste. You can go from things like taking hours or days down to literally minutes. So again, connecting directly to your data, going to have a cost, going to have some setup that goes along with it, but it's going to have a huge, huge, huge ROI in your organization. Now, some of these connections can be fairly straightforward depending on the setup. So not everything is going to require you contracting somebody out to do it. So as an example, I'm going to give you a scenario that I worked with on one of our customers where they were getting everyone to budget, but they wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page using all of the same exchange rates from what they're doing. So how we did that was tying in with Excel with a feature it has to go to a website and pull data off of a website and pull it right into Excel. So right here you can see that we're going in, I'm just walking through them as steps, right? And this is the kind of thing that Express can help you with and we can get you more information on, where you're actually able to go out and find a website that had exchange rates. And right here you can see it, and immediately it populates that data back into Excel. So every time everybody opened this up, everyone was on the same page with what exchange rates were being. So again, connecting to your data has a huge positive ROI. Next, spend some time validating data up front. One of the biggest causes for budget problems is that people are putting in, things like text where you were expecting $1, and that breaks all of your formulas. The other big thing is that people, because they're not paying attention, they're putting in numbers that are way too big or way too small, not realistic, right? Well, Excel has a great concept called data validation, right? Where you can actually say, in this cell, I can only put in numbers. I can't put in text. I can only put in numbers, like whole numbers, like I'm showing you up on screen here, between a minimum and a maximum. So with this data validation, you can ensure that people are putting in numbers where you expect numbers, text where you expect text, and then all your formulas don't break, okay? And you can also put in, like I said, mins and maxes to make sure that their numbers that they're putting in are reasonable, and you can let them know you do this. So you put this in up front, now all of a sudden you've helped clean up your data at the point where it's going to get collected by your individual people. Okay. Next, think about your naming conventions. And I'm covering this now because it's going to come into play later on when we talk about merging and making it better. I see a lot of things like this for file names in Excel. So that first one, is that the sales budget version 1 or is that Sal's budget, right? Is the next one, is that the final budget or is that the finance budget, right? And the last one, is that the fiscal year operating budget? That's probably what it is, right? So I see a lot of names like that. Do something like what I'm showing you below it down. And again, this doesn't have to be exactly, but you can see that I'm doing things where I'm very specific into what this worksheet's all about. It's like in my example here, it's what location is this for, what department it's for, and what business process it's for. Is this the budget or the forecast, and what year is it for? That way, when you're going to look at all of your forms, do we have everything completed? Are we missing anything? You've got clear, concise information. If somebody else needs to help you out during the process, they know exactly what they're working on. Okay, it's not a big thing, but again, a lot of these little things I'm going to tell you are very simple little things that you can start doing that are together going to have a huge ROI for you as an organization. All right, input. This is all about getting the best data out of the people that are working on the budget. So now you've created all your forms, and now you're trying to get the best out of people. First of all, eliminate the divide by 12. This is the divide by 12 mentality, where I just take what I think I'm going to spend for the year and divide it by 12. Yeah, it's easy, but it's also unrealistic. In your organization, with a few exceptions, maybe rents, insurance, some leases kind of things, or maybe you've got some contracts on the revenue side, very seldom are any of your revenue or expenses identically equal month to month to month, especially if you take into account days in the month or number of work weeks, time of year, and so forth. I'm going to use an example to illustrate why this is critical. This is what I call the seasonal dilemma. So both the blue and the orange lines there come out to 1.25 million, okay? Blue is the actual. Red is the original budget divided by 12. So in my example here, again, we're wintertime. If you're a ski resort, right, you're going to have much higher costs in the winter months and much lower costs in the summer, okay? Why is this a big deal? Well, if you're using your budget to get to cash flow projections, if you're doing the divide by 12, you're going to not get realistic cash flow. And if that's going to drive if you can make payroll or not, these have serious repercussions. So stop your people from doing divide by 12. Next, talked about this earlier. You want to budget the drivers, not the dollars. Okay, and drivers are things like rates and quantities. I'm going to give you an example. It's simplistic, but it helps get my point across. So why do you want to budget the drivers? Well, let's talk about example one. Your salespeople are predicting $5 million in sales, and your current unit price is $10,000 per unit, which means you have 500 units to build, warehouse, and ship at the end of the day. But what happens if your people are still predicting $5 million in sales, but they're also in their minds dropping the price to $2,500 per unit? That means now you've got 2,000 units to build, warehouse, and ship, which is 4 times the volume, right? You may not have the warehouse space for that. You may not have the manufacturing staff, the production lines to do this. You may have to order far more volume from overseas that takes 8 weeks, 12 weeks to get here, right? So without budgeting the drivers, you don't know this, okay? And it's critical that you budget the drivers, okay? So spend some time doing this. In Excel, it's easy. It's A times B equals C. Excel is fantastic for this. And this is going to get you not only the dollars, but also the other things that you need to make business decisions going forward. Okay? Next, this is what I talk about, the level of detail. I want you to spend more time budgeting less, but budgeting better, right? I'm going to go back to this little example spreadsheet right here. There is a whole bunch of stuff that you budget that probably is immaterial to your business. Think the old traditional 80-20 rule, okay? A lot of stuff is just going to happen no matter what. It's going to be the same, maybe a little variation, but having your people spend time on that is taking up mental space. It's adding time to their budgeting process, okay? So what I want you to do is to identify the 20% of the things that drive your business. And that's what I want your employees, your contributors to focus on. The other 80%, you know what? Copy last year's actuals, bump them up by 2%, 3%, whatever you feel comfortable doing, right? Leave it as is. And then have them focus on that 20% and make sure that 20% is as good and as accurate impact on your budgeting and forecasting than anything else you can do. All right. Next, spend. Remember, the numbers by themselves do not give you any clear indication if the person putting the numbers in is even being anywhere realistic about the numbers, right? Best way to do that in Excel is using that little right-click add note feature to let people put in what they're thinking about, right? This is going to be important later on when you judge whether or not these numbers are realistic. Now, the only problem with doing this in Excel is that as you roll up all of your Excel workbooks, you're going to lose all of that great information because the notes don't roll up in Excel. This is one of those areas where having an application to do budgeting and forecasting is going to help you out. And again, I'm going to show you what True Sky does, just so you know. This is the kind of thing where people can add in notes where it tags it with date and time, who put the information in. You can even add things like electronic attachments as well. So having an application is one of those areas where you're going to really be able to really benefit by doing a lot of capturing the knowledge, the thought process, not just the numbers. All right. Are people always late? Well, you might want to consider some fake deadlines. Okay. So in your organization, you're going to have people that can never get their budget done on time. Okay. For whatever reason. And the only solution I can give you to that is the exact same thing I do when I'm having to deal with my teenagers. When I say when I know I need to be out the door at 5 p.m., and that means shoes on, jackets on, off the devices, everything else, I tell my kids we have to be out the door by 5:45. It's about the only way you can do it. So if you have people that are consistently late, you might want to consider giving them fake deadlines. If you want to get really high quality numbers, consider moving to zero-based budgeting. For those of you that are unfamiliar with that term, zero-based budgeting means that you do not give your employees last year's figures for doing budgets this year. And why is that important? Well, what a lot of employees do is they take last year's numbers, whether it be actuals or budgets, and they don't really think through. Was that good money spent last year? Did I spend that money wisely last year? Is it really going to go up? Is it going to go down? All they do is they take last year's numbers and they bump it up by 2 or 3% and call it a day without giving a lot of thought to whether those numbers. So zero-based budgeting, you don't give them any prior. They've got to justify their budget from the ground up every time. Now, I get one complaint about zero-based budgeting is that it's very difficult. And my response is, yep, it is very, very difficult to do. Right? So the solution to this kind of goes back to that 80-20 rule. Okay. So because you're going to be budgeting fewer things, that 80-20, zero-based budgeting isn't quite as onerous. Now, even within the zero-based, that 20%, you can choose to apply zero-based budgeting to 2 or 3 of those, 20% of the 20%, as it may be, and just have your people do zero based on that. So you can kind of do a modified zero-based budgeting, but these will get you higher quality numbers. Spend a lot of time doing collaboration. People should not be budgeting in a vacuum. And this is also one of those things where sometimes people are too tight on security, as I was talking earlier, right? If somebody has a question, odds are, as you've always heard throughout your life, other people have the exact same question. However, a lot of times I may know something about the industry. I may know something that's going on in our world, our industry, our state, our province, our city, whatever the case may be, that not everyone else knows. I may know that our newest competitor is closing up shop someplace, and no one else knows that yet, right? So everyone should, I'm tool like SharePoint, something like that, or Dropbox, where everything is stored centrally. Emails for email, stop storing documents in email, right? They should not be working on budgets that are stored in email, store them centrally, okay? You need to stress that people don't rename. So again, earlier on I talked about a good naming convention. Now I'm going to stress why this is important, but people do not have them rename it to all your different workbooks to whatever they want to call it, with version 1, version 2, version 3, whatever. Make sure whatever solution you're using to store your stuff that is centralized is being backed up. I have worked with a lot of clients that have a rude awakening that there was a shared drive out there that was not getting backed up, and then they had some kind of catastrophe. They had a fire, they had a drive failure, whatever the case may be, and they lost everything. So you need to make sure that your backups are being backed up and they work, okay? But when you're doing the merge, make sure you protect the workbook. These are all things that make the merge easier. Protect the workbook. Don't allow people to add rows, delete columns, and everything. How you do that is in Excel. Doing protect the worksheet, protect the workbook. Now, there is one key. When you do a protect the worksheet, you protect the workbook, it's going to ask you for a password. If you don't have the password, you can't open the thing back up later on and make future edits. You're going to make your life a living nightmare. So when you're going to protect the worksheet, make sure you record the password and you share it. All right? So at the end of the day, you've got centralized storage. You've protected the workbook so people aren't deleting rows, adding columns, breaking some of your formulas that are there. Now you're going to use formulas to link back to one master workbook. Okay? You're not going to do copy paste. The thing that probably most of you don't know, a lot of you probably have done formulas that link different worksheets within a workbook. But you have the ability to create a master budget workbook, okay, that no one else can edit, that links formulas to all of the different worksheets that you have given to all of the people that are contributing to the budget process, okay? You can Google how to do this to a little bit more information. But the key for all this to work is that means I can have my master budget sheet. I can refresh the data. It will refresh everything in my master worksheet from those dozens or hundreds of different sub workbooks that are out there without me having to open up each and every one. But this only works if you're using shared storage, if your people are not renaming all of their workbooks, okay? So this is something that you should do. This is going to take down all of the pain, or a lot of the pain that goes along with that merge. Now, at the end of the day, if you want to get rid of all of the pain that goes along with the merge, you're going to want to invest in a budgeting and forecasting application. Most of them have automatic merging. Some of them have real-time merging. And again, as a blatant plug, if you're interested in that kind of thing, go visit our website. You'll see a little bit more information, or talk to somebody at Express, because they can help you out with some more information as well. So let's talk about the review process, okay? Time for review is to make sure that your numbers make sense and not whether or not the merge work. A lot of people spend a lot of time as they're reviewing these numbers troubleshooting whether or not that merge of the data worked. First of all, make sure you give yourself enough time. The review process, these approvers deciding if the numbers are good or not, they get rushed because people constantly get the budgets to them late. So make sure you give them enough time. Don't sweat the small stuff. So this kind of goes back to my 80-20 thing again. And again, here's a more example of it. As I talk about these things, go back to the old, for those of you that might remember Sesame Street. One of these things is not like the other. One of these things doesn't belong, right? So I'm looking at a budget of $2 million a month for these categories here, right? A run rate. But then I have postage in here at $2,000 a month. Believe it or not, I work with companies where they would argue and discuss and go back and forth on whether or not that postage number should be 2,000, 1,000, or 4,000, okay? That number is immaterial to your budget, right? It would have to be 10 times higher, 100 times higher before it becomes material to this budget. So why are you spending time budgeting for it? Why are you spending time reviewing it? Why are you spending time whether or not we should approve it or not? It's immaterial. But don't fall into that trap, because a lot of business does. This is how you're going to streamline your budget cycle, how you're going to get through quicker and quicker. All right. Next, decide who owns the numbers, okay? If you've ever heard in your organization, hey, I don't know how those numbers got in there, you can't hold me accountable to those numbers. That's probably because you don't have clear ownership, okay? In many organizations, frontline contributors can put numbers into the system, and as it goes through the review and approval process, managers update those numbers. The problem is, half the time, those changes and those new numbers never get communicated back to the original contributors who were kind of being held accountable to them. They don't know why the numbers changed. They don't know who changed. They don't know when they changed. They don't know what the context was about it. Okay, so my recommendation is that only the frontline people should ever edit numbers, and the people that review and approve or decline those numbers should only ever give the thumbs up or the thumbs down and reasons why, and send it back to the frontline people to do input. Okay, this way you ensure that everyone is on the same page, and the frontline people have the ability to question, contest, explain why they disagree, and so forth. If you're going to allow approvers to make changes, then you have to put some form of notification process in play to make sure everyone has the ability to accept those numbers and sign off on them and know what's happening, right? So again, ownership of the numbers is important. Make sure you understand the context, right? Look at the notes that people have put in, not just the numbers. Look at what's going on in the world around you before you review everything, okay? And if you're doing everything collaborative, like I talked about earlier, then you shouldn't have any surprises in these numbers. Maybe there's some tweaks that you want to make. I think that's a little too high, but there should never be a number that is so dramatically high or low that it catches you by surprise. All right, now we're going to talk about the analysis phase. Up to this point, you've got data, okay? This whole concept of turning data into information that you need to make business decisions. You can't make business decisions on data. You can only make business decisions on information, okay? So the first thing about analysis, this is the whole point of doing budgeting and forecasting, okay, is to get to this analysis point of view. This is the time that you want to do strategy, not review. You should not be debating whether or not we should approve these numbers. You should be going into the analysis phase thinking, you know what, these are the numbers that we're going to hit. We're going to hit these revenue numbers, we're going to hit these expense numbers. Or, you know what, we cannot hit our revenue numbers, or our expenses are way too high. How are we going to deal with it? What are we going to change about our business strategy? Not going back and changing the numbers. This is about time to how do you change the business to go forward. Make sure you analyze all of that content, right? All of the notes, what's going on in the world, all of the commentary, everything that goes along with it, all of the numbers. Again, if you're looking at different ways to slice and dice your data, new analysis and application is going to help you for that. But even if you don't have an application, you're going to have some tools at your ready that you might already use. One of those tools is built into Excel today. You may have to download a little bit of an add-in, but it's free. It's from Microsoft. It's called Spreadsheet Compare. And you can actually take two different workbooks, two different worksheets, and it will compare them side by side and tell you what has changed. It's a great way to see how your numbers change from this year to last year, from version 1 to version 2, and so forth. So I'm going to go into the final wrap-up things and I'll open up for some questions here, okay? First of all, at the end of the day, you should be aiming to increase the functionality of your budgeting and forecasting process. And with that, you're going to get increased control. You should be trying to simplify the interfaces that you're using, and that's going to reduce your administration overhead. You're going to try to integrate with all of your source systems, and that's going to give you faster turnaround time. You're going to spend some time on data validation. That's going to give you greater accuracy of your numbers. You're going to capture less, but you're going to capture better. And now you're going to get useful information, not just a ton of numbers. And you're going to capture that knowledge to get yourself your strategic answers. You're going to aim on getting everyone on the same page. And at the end of the day, you're going to get more time to think, or more time to golf, or more time to go skiing, or whatever your hobby is, or more time to lead the business, right? So with that, I'm going to thank you for taking time out of your day. I know for a lot of people, depending on where you are in the world or in the South, Things are really hectic right now, so I do appreciate spending some time here. Our information, if you want a little bit more about information about TrueSky, is up on screen. You can also reach out to Express. With that, I will again say thank you for taking time, and we can open it up for any kind of questions that anyone might have about what we do, or just about budgeting and forecasting best practices. Pick my mind about some of your scenarios, whatever the case may be. And I don't know, is Stacy, are you back?
I'm here.
Okay.
I don't see any questions. I don't see anyone that is unmuted. I'm looking. I'm here. Did anyone have any questions? I don't see any, but that was wonderful. Thank you so much. That was very informative. I thought that was a
we had one. I heard one question. Somebody started to talk.
Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
thank you. Yeah, no, so I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to get more information on pricing of options. I'll drop my email in chat if that's okay.
Yes, you
Yeah.
can
So what?
send an
Reach out to Stacy.
email. I'll
Yeah,
put my
Stacy's
email in the chat real fast, and you can send an email to me directly. Anybody can, and that way, give me a second. And that way you can send it directly to me, and I'm more than happy to get it to the right person to be able to assist you. So that's me. I'm Stacy C. At expressinfo.com. And David, I see your email there as well. I will get that. And David, if you can just shoot me an email, we will get somebody to be in touch with you.
Great, thank you. My
pleasure. Thanks, Alan. That was very informative, and I really appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for attending. That was great. And I'll make sure to get a recording to everybody as soon as I can.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Thanks,
Thank you, folks.
Thanks, everybody.